welcome to the 14th edition of Exploring Enterprise, the podcast series from the Enterprise Research Centre. My name's Mark Hart, I'm Deputy Director of the ERC. I'm really pleased to be joined today by three experts and three individuals who have very much their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the small business world at the moment. We're joined by Fiona Graham, Director of External Affairs and Policy at the Institute for Family Business, Craig Beaumont, who is Chief of External Affairs at the Federation of Small Businesses, and Alex Veitch, who is Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the British Chamber of Commerce. It's really great to have all three of you together on this podcast. We're going to be looking backwards a little bit, a few weeks, to the autumn statement that was delivered by the Chancellor, and in particular what it means for the SMEs. But I think that, you know, even in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen a lot of data land again this morning in terms of the 3 months to the end of October, showing some traction, even though we've got a bit of good news somewhere buried in the data for the month of October. But I think that's probably more of a reflection of what happened in September compared to necessarily what's going on in October. Our own work on the cost of doing business index, which my colleague Stephen Roper has been working on, shows an unbelievable rise in the costs for particularly small businesses in doing business in Q3. So we know from the headline figures on the economy, things are not getting any better, but for small businesses, they're extremely critical at the moment. I work with a lot of high growth businesses on the Goldman Sachs program, 10,000 Small Businesses program, and being with them in Oxford recently, it's clear that even some of our, what we would call our high growth businesses are really struggling at the moment on a variety of fronts, be it in terms of the cost of doing businesses, being the issues about exporting, which our own research in the ERC has shown a complete collapse of the number of businesses who are actually exporting, never mind the value of exports. So we're really in, well, what we're talking the perfect tsunami as we come to the end of 22. And looking back, we can see where policy is heading. And I suppose the question for all of you is, what on earth is going to happen with the current policy framework for your members? Because clearly things are turbulent at best and extremely damaging moving into the 2023. So that's the context of it. So, I mean, Craig, I want to come to you first. So we eventually got the rerun of the autumn statement at the end of November. We saw your immediate reactions, but how has this gone down with your members?
I think you set the context really well. You know, look at even stats since then. GDP is down, 0.3% at 3 months to October. Costs are up. The uncertainty of the energy package from government means that 24% of our members said that they would shrink, sell or shut down if that huge amount of support and energy isn't coming through. So I think coming into the autumn statement, I think the government did a genius job at expectation management. Expectations were incredibly low. I don't think I've ever seen them quite so low. And then you kind of discount that because you saw the threats to things that didn't follow through. But there was very little in there on economic growth. It seems to have got a bad name after the Liz Truss government. So we said it was kind of high on stealth creation, low on wealth creation. And thinking about the World Cup, which everyone watched on Friday, on Saturday, I gave it a 1-3 score. The one positive being business rates and this 13.6 billion package, pretty good. At the top end of hopes, definitely. It's not fundamental reform, but avoiding an inflationary rise, extra help for retail, hospitality and leisure, and then also a bit of extra help on the revaluation. So if you're a small business and because of the revaluation, you fall out from small business rate relief or rural rates relief, there's a fund to help you. And then also getting rid of transitional relief in the wrong direction. It's all very technical, but basically a lot of money to help businesses with premises. And of course, those businesses are energy users as well. So that's the positive. And then on negative, we're going to talk about SME tax credits, but hitting dividends is a really bad move. It leaves limited company directors, we've got about 1 million in the UK, kind of being the only people who pay the extra 1.25% NICS equivalent, which is really bad. They had no income support during COVID, and now they're being hit again. And then fiscal drag on everything, the VAT threshold being one, employer national insurance threshold another. So basically, we've got a tax rising government at the moment when the economy is dipping. I think and just afterwards, there's been a couple of statements afterwards where they've kept the momentum going with some more positive stuff. One being on late payments, which we've been pushing really hard for, and there is a consultation. It's yet another consultation. We've had, I think, 6 or 7 in 10 years, but at least they're doing something. And we've got a new small business minister, Kevin Hollingrake, who could be quite good, we think, because he's a former small business owner himself, knows the stuff. So while there's been inertia on the official side, we're kind of looking at Bays going, actually, with Grant Shapps and with Kevin, you might actually have a bit of improvement there now.
Well, certainly they couldn't be any worse than what we've had previously. But I think you're right. Business rates has always been near the top of the list of something, irrespective of the economic climate, that small businesses are really concerned about. We want reform, we want reform. So I take your point. It's useful that that's actually been addressed. I mean, just before I move on to other colleagues, Craig, during COVID, we had this wonderful discussion about directors and the lack of support they've got. Why does this government in particular seem to have a blind eye to this particular issue? Can you put your finger on why that is?
There was a real unwillingness to look after them at the very start. So we created something, I don't know if you know, you probably do know about it, we call it the Directors' Income Support Scheme. We
had discussions about that at the time. Absolutely.
We basically outsourced policy from Treasury. We've never done this before, where we basically did the Treasury's job for them, not only coming out with the aims of a policy, but also designing the whole thing from scratch. And it did go quite far. It went all the way to ministers, and they were looking at it, but in the end they decided against because of risk. And I think they've got a wrong-headed kind of view on risk, because these are people who, at some point I should be attracted to, and you should too, to move away from our great salaried jobs and set up in business. And what you then do is you then have a supportive tax environment that says, off you go, you're taking a risk, you're putting everything on the line, your home, your livelihood, everything, and we're going to look after you a bit. But actually now, if you earn 40,000 as a limited company director, you'll actually pay more tax than your employee on £40,000. So there's no tax advantage at all now, and that's really, really bad. Of course, the government doesn't get enough tax in from that, and I think they've got money signs in their eyes, really, more than anything else for this group.
It is a strange anomaly in the whole sort of discourse about enterprise, to be perfectly honest. I'm going to turn to you, Fiona, now, in terms of, obviously you represent the family businesses, which are, many of them in the UK economy and vital to many of our local communities. I mean, what was the reaction there, listening to your members about the autumn statement?
Well, I think, as Craig said, pre the autumn statement, there was a lot of rumour about what was going to happen. That were kind of basically everything seemed to be on the table at one point or another, and some of those things would have been particularly damaging to kind of family businesses if there were any reforms to, say, inheritance tax. So I think people like Craig, Alex and I were going around pre-budget or pre-autumn statement saying what we need is stability, stability, stability. Everybody kind of got sick of saying it, but actually, that is what the autumn statement delivered. I think that was a feeling the first day or so was like, okay, phew, the worst things that we thought could happen didn't happen. We have this stability now. That's great. And then as the kind of weeks have followed, it's been such a crazy year. I can't quite remember how many weeks it is. It's 3 or 4 weeks since it happened. There's been that feeling of, okay, what next? Yes, stability for the markets, which we know is important, but what is the vision? Where is the growth going to come from? Yes, you've told us what you're doing on some of those short-term interventions, or no, maybe not the clarity some people want already on the kind of next stage for the energy package. But what does the vision look like? Where's the growth going to come from? What does the future economy look like? What does this government want to see the economy look like? Where do small businesses in particular fit into that? Where do startups, where do scale-ups? We just haven't kind of had that vision. So I think there been a bit of an anticlimactic feel to it, that, thank goodness that all the worst things that were possibly predicted didn't come off, but what it has really kind of changed the dial. I think, there's also a chancellor coming into this situation that Jeremy Hunt came into. You could see them making decisions like slashing capital spending, slashing R&D investment. I know the R&D tax credits is a very different thing, and I'm going to let Craig talk about that because the FSB are the experts there. But, not to just immediately slash those things and keep an eye on the longer term was encouraging. And, there's a temptation for chancellors to do that. So that was kind of one plus side. But I think that, we really do want to see that vision. On the question you're just talking about around dividend taxes, I think one of the challenges around this is tax policy doesn't like nuance or struggles with nuance often. And dividends through kind of just holding shares in a business where you're not actively involved is kind of just in the same bracket as a director who's working in the business, and there's no differentiation there. And there has been this ongoing discussion for many years about kind of unearned income versus, you know, income that you get through your job day to day, and the differentiation in the tax for those two things. And I think until Treasury recognises that there are different types of dividend income, perhaps that's going to be something that's going to continually not necessarily favour working directors and people who've set up small businesses. And it's an ongoing issue around the kind of the way that those nuances can and are treated within the tax system. In
your discussions with Treasury, and it's the same point I put to Craig, why is it that there's this lack of nuance? I mean, it's surely not beyond the wit of man or beast to begin to work your way through beginning to differentiate.
I think Treasury is always very concerned about potential loopholes or fringe behaviours, as they sometimes refer to things. And so they don't like adding in anything that then could be manipulated to make you fall into the wrong bracket or the wrong side of something. And so I think they like to try and keep things simple to avoid any of that potential manipulation around the edges. Yeah, and there's also kind of a cost administration side to it. You don't want the taxes that you're collecting to cost more to administer than they actually bring in income.
Do you think it would be helpful for them to be more transparent about these issues rather than just simply say, no, we're not doing that?
I think it's useful to know, why is a red line where a red line is, to say we've actually decided, for people like us who kind of go in and have these conversations. I've certainly had conversations with civil servants in the past about all sorts of different issues where they say, look, the reality of this is we understand there's a risk here, but we think the risk in the other direction is worse. So we're going to stick where we are. And that's, not necessarily on dividends, but that's on all sorts of issues. So I think that it's useful for people like us to hear that, because it informs the discussions that we can have, but maybe some more transparency for business owners would be more useful as well.
And sort of talking about the ERC agenda, I mean, it's the evidence and research gaps perhaps that need to be filled to be able to convince officials in various departments about what it is they should be thinking about. Before I move on to Alex, I just want to touch base on the particular type of businesses you represent, which is the family businesses. And obviously, businesses in that context, they exist in the context of the family. I mean, what has this year been like for the family as much as the business? I mean, what are you hearing from your members?
The past few years have been very challenging for anybody running a business, particularly for small business owners. There has been a level of personal exhaustion that you saw throughout the pandemic of having to chop and change and adapt. And that was very, very challenging. And that took a toll on people personally. Alongside that, this year, then you have the kind of broader economic challenges, and people are feeling, and the political upheaval that we've seen over the past year isn't just felt by people running businesses, it's felt by households, it's felt by individuals, it's certainly felt by people who work in public affairs, as my colleagues will definitely feel as well. But that has an impact on when we talk about business confidence. We can't, particularly for small businesses, we can't just talk about what are the levers that the government's pulling in the small business arena. It's what does the country feel like? How confident do individuals in the country feel? Because often when people talk about business, they talk about it as this kind of nebulous thing, but actually at the heart of all businesses are individuals, whether they're families or not. And, in small businesses, that's even more true, the individuals on the front line. So I think that it's been a challenging year, and I think that everyone in every industry would say that.
Thanks, Fiona. Alex, I'm turning to you now, not just for a reaction to the autumn statement, but picking up on what Fiona was saying there, and Craig. I mean, one of the decade-old problems is lack of business investment. So, do we think the autumn statement has unleashed that? It appears from previous comments that maybe not. But what was your general reaction to the statement?
Thank you very much. Very similar to Fiona and Craig. the way it felt to us was a little bit like if you imagine a very large balloon full of air, the air of relief when you hear that HS2 isn't being cut back anymore, and that Northern Powerhouse Rail isn't being cut back anymore, and government investment in new nuclear is going ahead. That filled us with happy feelings. But then gradually the air of the balloon started leaking out when we heard the rest, which, as the other two have said very well, included a number of detailed and rather difficult tax policy changes that, if not directly impeding growth, aren't exactly going to help. And so it was relief tinged with disappointment. And I think we landed in quite a similar place to the other groups on the call. And I think the only ray of light, or at least the one that came out strongly to us in terms of investment, to answer your question, was the retention of the increased annual investment allowance of £1 million per annum. So that is a good thing. We're glad to see that for sure, and it's important to flag that. But if we're talking in general terms, like Fiona said, about what's the general direction of travel, and Craig was alluding to as well, what does the government really think about entrepreneurs, about investors, about directors? We're sort of chopping away at that feeling that this is a great place to start and grow a business, as opposed to a place where we're struggling to get by.
Alex, I mean, you obviously represent, as the other organisations do as well, a regional network of chambers. So, I mean, what's the view in the various regions with respect to the statement and the sort of landscape over the next number of months?
Yeah, that is an interesting question for us. And yes, the chambers are, of course, all over the UK, every country of the UK and every part of England. And the interesting bit, though, is that the much more powerful results in our surveys are by sector rather than by region.
Okay.
And so, for example, the manufacturing sector had fared much worse, according to our quarterly surveys, on both expectations of profitability and inflation than the service sector. But we don't necessarily track a huge difference regionally, and that may be because geographic regions have their own areas of speciality, different clusters, different concentrations of sector. So it may be that actually I wouldn't quite go as far as a red herring, but certainly we get a lot more about which sectors are struggling or profiting than we do when it's broken down by region.
Okay, I'm going to bring Craig back in on that point as well, in terms of, is it sector, is it region? Which businesses are feeling it most? Is sector really the one to pay attention to here?
I don't actually think there's much in either, to some degree. I think everybody's feeling the pinch, back to kind of Fiona's point, really, because the driving factors are energy bills, inflation, lack of cash, high taxes, strikes, and a weaker consumer economy. And if you like, it affects everyone to some degree. And I think what's actually interesting is that you see everyone affected to a large degree, and then you see a bit of flex at the end. So definitely accommodation and food, definitely retail, definitely services, definitely manufacturing are the ones that have come out in our data as the ones who are in trouble. Construction, although it strangely looks as though it's on its way up, which is reflected in the GDP stats this morning as well. So I think the sectors, every sector is hit, and I think if you try and look at trends within those, the one thing that kind of comes over the top of all those factors is access to skills and people. And I think in terms of the workforce, that if you've got a business that relies on having a lot of people, that will be in trouble. And also, if you have a business that relies on contact with people, just as the weaker consumer economy really begins to kind of fall away a bit, you're also in trouble. So if you're a business that employs lots of people and needs in-person contact, you're probably in trouble. I think that started during COVID and it's got worse. Our community is contracted by 500,000 over 2 years. So we've gone down from 6 million to 5.5 million. We lost 400,000 the first year and 100,000 the second. So the rate of contraction is slowing, but it's still not very positive. And a lot of that is at the lowest end. So sole traders and freelancers. And that is people we think who are leaving, setting up on their own, and instead either taking a job where there's more security, or they've left the workforce. There's this, 630,000 people now who are economically inactive, but of working age in different ways, that really we need to be looking at. How do we get these people back into work or back into running a small business?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at, the ways in which, businesses are responding. And I looked at the latest SME Finance Monitor data, which is a little bit, doesn't really reflect what's happening out there at the moment. But certainly the actual appetite for external finance is falling, which goes back to the point about business investment. So it looks as if businesses are sort of battening down the hatches, so to speak. And you talked about cash flow. I mean, just, I know driving around the West Midlands, the number of restaurants and public houses I see closed on Monday, Tuesdays of the week. I see opening hours changing dramatically, which is clearly an indication of they just can't afford to keep the premises open 6-7 days a week. And this is not just a one-off. I mean, this is I'm leading into the busiest time of the year. This surely is a very worrying trend in the wider economy.
Yeah, this is supposed to be the golden quarter, especially for retail already. Yep. It should be for tourism, as for Christmas holidays, but also people booking in January. You'll see restaurants and bars. It's supposed to be their big Christmas party time. And then you move into the leisure sector, which in January, it's golden quarter. And after 2 Christmases, which were cancelled effectively for much of business, and the one before was actually disrupted because of decisions over the final look of Brexit back in 2019. Actually, this was supposed to be the recovery Christmas, and it isn't. And that's a real problem. So, one thing we're thinking about is we can't just be telling the government off. We've all got to kind of step up. So, if you're, as an individual, we're trying to encourage people to say, look, you might be cutting your consumer spend, but do it. Make sure every choice you make about every pound you spend is important. And if you spend it in a local small business, you're keeping that local small business community alive. So we're asking people really to realise the power they do have in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. Alex, coming back to you, I mean, in terms of, trying to turn this into more of a positive discussion rather than the sort of doom and gloom pre-Christmas. I mean, it's easy to say what more the government can do, but we know the state of the economy. We know the state of the public finances. Well, we think we do anyway. So, and again, following up on what Craig's saying, I mean, what's the plan going forward into 2023? What more can we be doing as a society, as a group of individuals, to actually begin to alleviate the worst excesses of what we're facing at the moment? There's things outside our control, of course, but what can we be doing?
That's a great question. It really is, and I think we all need to not talk ourselves down and talk ourselves into a gloomy recessionary place as well. And I applaud the FSB's efforts there about promoting small business. I mean, the chambers have got quite a mix of business size and business sector. But whenever I go out to meet their business, it's amazing how confident and optimistic I find business people to be. And it would be amazing to channel some of that optimism and enthusiasm into the vernacular from government coming out at the minute. I think in all seriousness, though, if Christmas is going to be patchy, of course, the train strikes are not helping, certainly London economy and probably elsewhere on that front. But if Christmas is going to be difficult and challenging, if we are going to face continued high energy bills, we're still not quite sure where the government's going to land on energy support. One thing that would be well worthwhile if you are in a business operating from a premises of some kind, to take a very close look at your energy bills, take a close look at your transportation costs, we also, I think it was Craig that mentioned this, constantly on the government's case about people, shortage of people. If you want to do something to unleash growth, unlock Britannia, whatever one wants to call
Careful,
it.
Alex, careful, calm down.
But if there's one thing the government could actually do to help, wouldn't cost much money, is be more flexible on immigration. We don't see much sight of that politically at the minute, but there are still something like over 1 million job vacancies. It is not being filled by the high migration figures at the moment, most of whom are students. So come on, let's try to be pragmatic, less political, and allow businesses to grow.
Do you see any signs of that discourse changing in 2023?
It's a bit challenging at the minute. I personally, I wouldn't see a big political moment on it. But just an observation is when I look from time to time at the Home Office website, look at what visas are available, and there actually are quite a few specific targeted visas there. And in previous jobs I've done, I've been quite involved in negotiations around that. And the one for HGV drivers, for example, I was quite involved in that in a previous life. And so I think what I've certainly found is that there is pragmatism to be found. The business case to government has to be exceptionally watertight. Yeah. But it may be that just quietly there'll be moves in this direction, but perhaps without the big political moment of reform. That's just my personal opinion.
So things happening in terms of, just a quiet movement of the number of visas for particular areas without
different sectors, different places, possibly more. Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of being positive, I mean, what I can see and looking from the analysis that we do in the Enterprise Research Centre, we know that, for example, 10% of businesses, small business in particular, in 2020 had their best year ever. So we can see there is opportunity in crisis. We can see that our small business community, if I can describe it like that, are actually quite able, if they are encouraged and can see harness the resources to do so, actually continue to provide jobs and wealth for households and individuals across the country. So, it's a small number, yes, but we have to harness that mindset, if you like, that small business leaders can actually, plan their way through recessions. And in fact, when I look back to all previous recessions, some businesses have had their best years ever back in the early 90s, in the dot-com bubble burst and the financial crisis. There were businesses who were able to, in all sectors, who were able to grow fast. So I have to take my hat off to the small business community, because many thousands of them have risen to the challenges, and I think they're capable of rising to it again. I think there is an issue about the energy crisis, though, and I think that some of the stories I'm hearing about the increase for premises electricity bills are quite shocking. Surely the government can have to say, as they've done in other countries, say, look, until 2024, this is the deal. Rather than simply saying there's a cliff edge coming in March, we'll let you know as soon as we've made up our minds. That's not good enough for business planning for the next year, surely. Fiona, what's your thoughts on that?
I think, I think the more certainty businesses can have on the energy stuff is hugely important. I think that, Bays have said we should see something pre-Christmas on what the kind of some more detail on what the kinds of sectors or kinds of requirements for business support are going to be moving forward with that. I think the challenge is when the original energy package was announced for businesses, we said to our members, we've surveyed our members and asked them, do you view yourself as a high energy using business? And I think there were 2 businesses maybe that said, no, we don't think we are. Everybody else did. People who have retail, people who have business parks, care homes, hospitality, definitely, manufacturing, education, everybody. You can't, if you're running a nursery for small kids, you can't turn the heaters off. That's simply not practical. So I think it is going to be very, very hard for the government to target support and not leave people out. With any of this targeted support, you always have people who feel that they've been missed out and they are a high energy user. I think we need to make sure that we're not just talking about, your traditional energy intensive industries like steel or whatever it might be, that we're looking at it much more based on the need and the reality of the business. And because otherwise we're going to see people really left out, and the more certainty they can give, the better, because there's does still, we talked, about the need for stability. There does still feel, I think, within the business community that there's a lot of kind of, it's almost like that, what's going to be next? So where we can take away that what might be next concern, we should be prioritizing doing that, because there will always be something that we can't foresee on the horizon. I think we were talking a bit about sectors and regions and the differences that people are feeling. I think one of the interesting things here is business age as well. Mark, you just referred to some people had really good times in previous recessions in terms of their business growth. One of the interesting things is pre-Family Business Week, we were going around the country having various events with different businesses. And one of the things that kind of the common message that kept coming out was, we want to talk about the long term. Like, yes, we know everybody's got these short-term challenges and there'll be these various interventions, but we've been through wars, we've been through recessions, we've been through probably some of them more than one major global pandemic, we've been through all sorts of things and we survive. And we want to talk about the big, the longer term challenges. I think there is something there about business age as well, and what can you learn from businesses that have been around for a really long time, around how they've survived, what were the difficult choices they had to make, what put them in a good position to come out the other side of it. Because there's a huge amount of resource and knowledge on that resilience side.
I think that's right, and certainly it's the evidence I can see, not just in the research that we do, but also in the work that I do with SMEs across the country. Looking forward, and you talked about the future a little bit. We saw last week what perhaps a future Labour government might do with respect to the enterprise agenda, both in terms of startups and actually helping businesses grow. Can I just quickly sort of gauge your reaction? Are they on the right path? Was there enough detail in it for you, or was it just a high level sort of trot through the sort of things that you would expect every government to get the sound bites right for? Craig, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think Labour's looking sensible and looking like a potential government in waiting, and I think we couldn't have said that going back into the Corbyn era. There was good policy actually written within the Corbyn era for small business, but the ability, the chance of it being actually enacted was quite small. This is now changing. Labour's far ahead in the polls, of course that can fall back, but they're doing the right thing. They are engaging with business, and business is falling over themselves. Their corporate days at Labour Party conference, every corporate is turning up and talking to them and turning away from the Conservatives. So that's quite interesting. I suppose for us, for the small business community, we are cross-party through and through at FSB, and I know the other organisations are as well. So we're pleased to see it. And I think this startup scale-up review was short and sharp, but the document's quite interesting. It has a few things in there, like a new procurement council, which we are very fond of. This idea that you set up an expert group who will sort out public procurement. You might remember that David Cameron announced a third of public procurement should go to SMEs back in 2015, gave it a 5-year target. So 2020, which December 2020 should have happened. Theresa May came in and subtly knocked it out to 2022, which is of course this year. So they've got 3 weeks left. Are they going to meet it? Absolutely not. So this procurement council would work out how to do that. There's a lot in there about university spin-outs, which I think is really good as well. And then, of course, they cover off business R&D, which is a bit of a mess from the government. And finally, they're doing some improvements to the British Business Bank. They've probably hyped it a bit much by saying they're going to make it independent, a bit like the Bank of England, when in fact what it is about giving them a 5-year kind of funding package. And I think that's really good, because the BBB exists precisely for moments when the economy tanks, because the credit crunch in 2008, the lack of lending, the risk-based kind of withdrawal from the market, BBB is able to step in. And if they're able to have 5-year scope so they can work out their funds, do levelling up because of where their funds go, and really, really good. And that shows someone's put some thought in. So this isn't just a few slogans. And Labour has obviously already announced really big policy commitments for 2024 on business rates, which is actually even better than what the government announced, and late payments as well. And so that's actually looking to me like quite a good package.
Interesting. I think, in terms of the British Business Bank, people tend to forget when and why it was set up in the first place. It was going back into the post-financial crash, and it was designed, as you say, for the not a bank of last resort, but basically to make sure there were funds available, and I think to give it a long-term funding package. And I know they have been doing a lot in terms of, the Midlands investment funds, for example, venture capital. They're trying to address major issues, though they still have come up with this wonderful slogan, which I love, which is, 1 penny in the pound of equity finance goes to female-led businesses, which is still a shame that is hanging around the UK economy. Alex, what about you and the announcements from Labour last week?
Yeah, I really, I love what Craig said. Did take a relatively quick canter through it. There's quite a lot in there about financing.
Yeah.
Which is obviously they've done their homework. It's not my area, so I won't really comment on that. But it's very, very, very glad to see the SME procurement piece in there as well. I mean, the government's done the procurement bill. I feel like the direction of travel is okay, or at least should get us to a better place. But that is a very interesting point to make. And yeah, on the British Business Bank, why not? Let's see them challenged, and let's see what they can do. I mean, the BBB, they do a fair amount. We're talking to them. They're just looking again at their startup loan system, and they're looking at how that mentoring's done and trying to make that better potentially. They are doing quite a lot on green finance as well, they say. So I feel like there's a huge amount of willingness at the BBB, and maybe they are constrained by their setup situation. I'm not sure what the details are on that, to be honest. But if that's a gap, then let's definitely look at it. I feel like Craig summed up quite well. It's kind of the ball's back in the Conservatives' court a little bit on this, and where's the enterprise strategy that previous Secretary of State for Bayes talked about? One might see the beginnings of an enterprise strategy in that paper, which again is quite thoughtful, certainly well researched in terms of stakeholder engagement, and had a lot of really interesting ideas in it.
If we want small businesses to invest, then the financial side of things is really crucial, absolutely, to make it easier. Fiona, any thoughts on what you heard last week?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Craig and Alex have said on the kind of detail of the paper. I think for me, what's really important is that any scale-up policy that anybody has is looking at scale-ups at whatever age the business is when they're scaling up, because sometimes startup policy's been written for, for the first couple of years, and then scale-up policy's been like the obvious next step. But actually for a family business, they may have been running for a couple of generations, and the scale up, the massive scale up, might actually happen when the next gen comes in and they kind of digitize the business, or whatever it might be, whatever new skills they're bringing into it. So we have to make sure that scale up policy works and is supporting businesses, no matter their age, when they are scaling up. I think that's really important for me. And that also, when we're talking about the scaling up journey, that we're talking about ownership and the next step for the business as part of that as well. Because what you don't want to happen is to support this startup business, see it scale up, and then there not be a clear idea of what the succession looks like, if it's going to continue as a family business, which obviously we hope it does, or whether it's going to move on to being owned by the employees, or be sold or whatever. And we don't want that succession event, whatever the next step in the ownership of the business looks like, to be an absolute kind of like halt to the scale up. We want the scale up to continue through the succession and beyond, so that it continues to grow. And I think that that's really important, that we can't just think about it as kind of a really narrow, 5 to 10 years sort of time frame for the business life.
I quite agree, Fiona, on that. In my own research in the Enterprise Research Centre, I've been advocating for many years that can we please stop talking about scale ups as something. I view it as a verb, and it is about the life cycle of the business and the episodic nature of growth. And this is where I get into trouble with my friends in the Scale Up Institute and my dear friend Irene and Sherry about, look, this silly definition that we've latched onto of high growth firms from the OECD has done a great disservice to policy on scaling in the UK for many years now. But that's for another time. We're out of time today. I would just like to thank you all for sharing very succinctly and also very openly your views on what's been happening in the policy world in the last few weeks. And I do appreciate you being quite frank with this. I would like to thank you formally, Craig, Alex, and Fiona, for joining us today. I think, we are in for an interesting set of 12 months. The aggregate economy is not going to get any better, but I do believe that our small business leaders and our small businesses and the support that your organisation give them will actually enable many thousands, many hundreds of thousands of businesses to be resilient in the turbulent months ahead. And I know you'll continue your lobbying of the various government departments and individuals to make sure that they pay attention to the issues that your members are raising. So thanks to all of you for listening to this podcast too. If you've enjoyed it and want to hear more, you might want to take a look at some of our other Exploring Enterprise podcasts in the series. They're all available on Spotify. And if you're interested in finding out more about the work of the ERC, please visit our website at www.enterpriseresearch.ac.uk. So a seasonal holiday greeting from me. And thank you once again to our guests. Thank you all.